Wyoming Territory, 1883, the girl came stumbling out of the cottonwoods just past dawn, face bloodied, dress torn, and dragging one foot behind her like it had given up. Cullen Tate had seen plenty of things in his 34 years, men shot clean through the chest, a boy trampled by a spooked mare, a woman dying in childbirth in the back of a wagon, but nothing like her. Not with that mark burned into her cheek like a twisted signature. He dropped the saddle blanket he had been shaking out, his boots already moving across the clearing by the creek. "Hey," he called, hands open, slow steps. "You all right?" She turned toward him, hair tangled and wild, and in the gray light her eyes looked too big for her face. She did not answer, just stared, wobbling where she stood. Then her knees buckled. Cullen caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel each rib under the torn fabric. There was a fresh cut above her right brow, and her lip was split. But it was the raw red brand burned into the left side of her face that made him go cold. A curved D with a line through it. He had seen that mark once before. "Easy," he said, shifting her in his arms. "You are safe now." He carried her into his cabin. It was a small place, but clean. He laid her down on the bed and stoked the fire higher. She was unconscious, breath shallow, fingers twitching like she was trying to fight off something that was not there anymore. He cleaned her wounds without asking questions, wrapped her foot, left water and a biscuit beside the bed. Then he sat in the rocking chair by the fire and waited. She woke by late afternoon, her eyes opened slow, blinking at the low ceiling. Then she jerked upright, panic rushing through her. Cullen stood. "You are safe." "Nobody's coming." She stared at him, eyes darting to the door, the windows, back to his face. "I found you by the creek. I carried you here. I ain't gonna hurt you." She looked at the water cup, then back at him. Her voice came out hoarse, like it had not been used in days. "You live alone," he nodded. "Just me." She picked up the cup with shaking hands and drank. He watched her throat move as she swallowed, watched her eyes scan the room. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Hattie." He crouched near the bed. "Hattie what?" Her eyes flicked toward the fire. "Older." He nodded once. "Cullen Tate." She looked at him hard, like she had to decide something. Then she said, "You seen this before." She touched the brand on her face. Cullen's stomach turned. He had not wanted to believe it. "I have," he said, "on a man, long time ago, down near Fort Bridger." Her voice was quiet. "His name's Deacon Lang." Cullen stood slowly, pulse pounding in his ears. "You sure?" She nodded. "He took me from a wagon outside of Anston, killed my brother, said no one would come looking for me, said I belong to him now." Cullen felt his jaw clench. He turned and walked to the window, kneading the cold air through the crack in the frame. "I knew him when I was younger," he said. "He was bad then, mean, but I did not know he broke off, fists curling. "I should have shot him the day I met him." She looked at him, eyes no longer scared but sharp. "Then you do believe me?" Cullen turned to face her. "I believe you." She lay back against the pillow, eyes closing for a moment, like the truth of that settled something inside her. "I will not let him find you," he said. "You got my word." "I do not need saving," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. He sat back in the rocking chair. "You are safe here for as long as you need." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. 3 days passed. Hattie stayed mostly in bed, quiet but alert. Cullen made her food, kept the fire going, did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. She did not cry, not once. But sometimes he would catch her staring into the flames like she saw something burning there besides wood. On the 4th morning, she stood outside the cabin, wrapped in his long coat, watching the sun rise over the ridge. He stepped out beside her with coffee. "You sleep." "Some." He handed her the cup. "You feel steady on that foot." "Steadier." They stood in silence, the wind brushing over the grass. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "He branded me after I tried to run." Cullen swallowed hard, looking down at the dirt. He said if anyone saw me, they would know I was his. That no decent man would want a girl marked like me. Cullen turned to her. "He is wrong." She looked up at him, eyes searching. He is wrong, Hattie. Something shifted in her face, like the words had cracked something open. You do not look at me like I am ruined, she whispered. He stepped closer, voice low, because you are not. They stood close, just the wind between them. She blinked fast, lowering her eyes. I do not know how to be, after this. You do not have to know, Cullen said. You just have to be here. That is enough. Her fingers brushed his for a second when she handed back the cup. It was the first time she had touched him. A week passed. Hattie helped him with the chickens, the firewood, sweeping the porch. She started to hum sometimes when she worked. Cullen tried not to stare too much, but it was hard. She was strong, even if her hands still trembled sometimes. She was clever, quick, and when she smiled, rare, but real. It felt like sunlight hitting something cold. One night they sat by the fire after supper. She was sewing a tear in her sleeve. He was carving a handle for a knife. She looked up. Why do you live way out here? He shrugged. Got tired of people, or maybe I was just tired of myself around them. She nodded. I get that. He looked at her. You want to stay? She did not answer right away. Then she said, I do not know where else I would go. You do not have to decide now. She met his eyes. What if I said I want to stay because of you? His chest tightened. Then I would say I am glad. They stared at each other for a long time. Then she stood, walked over to him, and knelt beside his chair. I feel safe when you look at me, she said. He reached out slowly, brushing a curl from her cheek. His fingers lingered. You are safe, always. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was soft, careful, but full of something that had been building since the moment he carried her inside. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. I did not think I would ever feel anything good again. He rested his forehead against hers. You deserve everything good. That night, she stayed in his arms. Not in fear, but in choice. And for the first time in a long, long time, neither of them felt alone. The early spring thaw turned the ground soft beneath their boots, and the wind carried the smell of wet pine and loam down from the foothills. Cullen had taken to rising before first light, splitting wood and checking the traps along the ravine while the sky still held stars. Hattie rose not long after, pulling her shawl close around her shoulders, her eyes steady now where they once flinched at shadows. She didn't speak much while they worked, but she no longer flinched when Cullen passed near. Each day, she moved with more purpose, counting the chickens, stirring the sourdough starter, mending the worn seams of his shirts without being asked. She never asked to stay. She stayed anyway. One morning, after the frost had lightened and the sun stretched higher than it had in weeks, she found him at the barn, oiling the hinges on the tack trunk. You ever ride out toward Carter's Ridge? She asked, stepping over a patch of mud. He glanced up. Not since late fall. Why? There's a bluff above the switchbacks. You can see clear to the basin from there. I used to go up with my brother when we still lived near Evanston. He set down the oil rag. You want to ride out that way? She nodded, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. I'd like to see it again. By midday they were saddled, the mare slow and steady beneath her, Cullen's gelding keeping easy pace. The trail twisted upwards, scrub pine giving way to wind gnarled oak, the land falling away behind them in layers of sage and stone. They didn't speak much as they rode. The silence between them had grown comfortable, no longer heavy with things unsaid. At the ridge, they dismounted and walked the final stretch on foot. The view opened wide. Snow still clung to the peaks to the west, but the basin below shimmered pale gold in the sun. Hattie stood near the edge, her arms folded tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. I used to think I'd end up in Salt Lake, she said. Working in a dry goods store, maybe married to some shopkeeper with a soft voice and a round face. Cullen leaned against a boulder, not pushing. She glanced at him. Then my brother got in debt. We left town fast, never made it far. He watched the way her fingers curled into her sleeves. Was it just you and him? Our folks died in the fever when I was 16. He did what he could, but he gambled too much, borrowed from the wrong men. Cullen nodded once. It's a hard thing, owing what can't be paid back. She looked back out toward the basin. I never thought I'd get as far as this again. You're further now, he said. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders softened. They rode back slow, the sun dipping low behind them. That night, she lit the lantern without asking, and he set 2 bowls on the table without a word. The quiet between them felt like something earned. Later, when the fire had burned low and the wind picked up outside, she folded her hands in her lap and looked across the room. You ever think about leaving Wyoming? She asked. He shook his head. This land holds more of me than anywhere else ever did. She blinked, then said, What held you here? He met her gaze. I left the army near Rock Springs, took work where I could, then the years started stacking up. I got used to the quiet, built this place 1 board at a time, never thought much past the next season. And now, he didn't look away. Now there's someone here who makes the quiet feel different. Her breath caught. She stood, walked to the window, then turned back. I used to think no man would ever know me past what he could take from me. You were wrong, he said. She crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of him. You see more than what's been done to me. He stood, close enough to feel the warmth between them. I see who you are when no one's looking. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Will you say my name? Hattie. She closed her eyes like the word filled something hollow. When she opened them again, she reached for his hand and he took it. That night, she lay beside him without fear, the wind brushing soft against the cabin walls. They did not speak of what waited out there, what Deacon Lang might still try. But the fire held steady, and so did they. Cullen heard the rider before he saw him, hooves striking frozen earth in a staggered rhythm, too urgent for someone just passing through. He stepped off the porch and waited, rifle resting easy in his hand, barrel low but ready. The man pulled up short near the gate, a lean sorrel lathered with sweat. The rider was younger, dust-caked, and wore a deputy's badge that caught the light as he dismounted. Name's Harlan Sykes, he said, breath clouding the air. Out of Uintah County. Cullen nodded once. What brings you out this far? The man glanced toward the cabin. Looking for a woman, Hattie Alder. Cullen didn't move. What for? She's not in trouble. Harlan raised both hands. We got word from a marshal in Ogden, said she's likely in danger. A man broke from custody 2 days ago. Deacon Lang. Cullen's hand tightened on the rifle. They had him under watch for charges on 2 deaths near Evanston, Harlan continued. He slipped his cuffs, killed a guard with a hitching hook, and took a horse. Last seen heading north. Cullen's jaw worked, silent. Harlan looked toward the barn. You know, if she's here, she's here. The deputy looked relieved. Then we need to get her somewhere safer. Fort Bridger's got men stationed. She's not going anywhere, Cullen said, voice flat. With respect, this man's hunted. If he finds her, I said, she's staying. Cullen stepped off the porch. This land's got 1 way in and 1 way out. You want to help, you can ride the ridge and keep watch. Otherwise, you're just showing him where to look. Harlan hesitated, then gave a slow nod. I'll ride out at first light. Leave a signal stone if I see anything. Cullen watched him remount and ride toward the high trail, dust trailing behind like smoke. Inside, Hattie stood by the hearth, hands still, expression unreadable. He's out, Cullen said quietly. She looked up, her face calm in a way that unsettled him more than panic would have. All right, she said. He crossed to her, resting 1 hand on her shoulder. We'll take precautions. I'll set traps down by the lower fence. Keep the mare saddled. You'll sleep with the pistol near. I'll not run again, she said. You won't have to. That night they slept without speaking, but her hand found his beneath the blanket and neither let go. By the 3rd day, the wind carried grit and grit carried scent. Cullen moved quieter, listened longer. Hattie kept her rifle near the window, eyes sharper than any lookout he'd ever ridden with. She didn't ask if Lang would come. She already knew. Near dusk, she stepped outside and poured water for the chickens, her sleeves rolled up, collar open against the heat. Cullen stood by the gate, watching the tree line. You ever kill a man? She asked, not looking back. Once. In a mining camp down near Manila. He'd gone after a girl with a broken bottle. I didn't wait for the law, she nodded. I've thought about what I'd do if I saw him again. You don't have to decide now. I already have. The next morning, they found the first sign. A rope cut clean from the cedar post, hoofprints too deep to be one of theirs. Cullen crouched low, fingers brushing the disturbed dirt. He's close, he murmured. Hattie stood behind him, eyes fixed on the northern ridge. They did not speak again that day, just prepared. Buckets filled, wood stacked, rifles oiled. At dusk, Cullen took 2 lanterns and hung them at the ends of the porch, low and shielded, but visible to the trained eye. A signal Harlan would understand. They ate in silence, bread and beans cooling in their bowls. I ain't afraid of dying, she said finally. He looked up from his plate. I am. If it means losing you, she studied him, something turning in her expression. I never thought I'd be anyone's reason to stay alive, she said. You're mine. She reached across the table, fingers curling around his, when the knock came 3 short, 1 long. It was near midnight. Harlan stepped in, face drawn. Saw smoke 2 miles west, campfire tucked low, could be him. Cullen was already strapping his holster. I'll ride with you, Hattie said. No, Cullen said sharply, then softened. If something goes wrong, you ride east. Don't wait for me. Harlan watched the exchange without comment. Then they mounted and disappeared into the dark. By dawn, Cullen returned alone. Hattie stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. It's done, he said. She didn't ask how. Just stepped down and walked to him, her arms wrapping around his waist, holding tight. He pressed his mouth to her hair. You're safe now, for good, she pulled back, eyes full but dry. I want to build something here with you. His voice came quiet. You already have. They stood in the rising light, the wind carrying only the sound of creek water and waking birds. No more running, no more hiding, only the long day ahead and each other. Cullen had never built a fence with another set of hands beside him. The posts had always gone in slow, each one measured by his own stride, tamped down with his weight alone, strung with wire under a sky that never changed. But now, Hattie measured too. She walked with the twine stretched between them, her fingers gripping it firm, her gaze sharp as she eyed the line. She didn't ask how deep to dig, she already knew. They were halfway down the south pasture when she said, I never learned to swim. Cullen looked up from the auger, sweat streaking his temple. You never had the chance. We weren't near much water, she said. And when we were, my brother always said not to waste time on things that wouldn't feed us. He nodded, turning back to the post hole. You want to learn, she tilted her head. You know how. Spent 2 summers on a cattle run near the Platte. River crossings teach you quick. She ran her thumb along the edge of the post. I'd like to try, not now. Come summer. He watched her a moment before setting the next post. Then we'll find a place where the current's slow and the bottom's soft. She smiled faint and didn't look away. By early evening, the last post stood firm. Cullen tied off the last length of wire, and Hattie tested the tension with her palm. The sun had dropped low enough to cast long bars of light across the field, and the air smelled of turned earth and pine sap warming on the bark. Back at the cabin, Cullen lit the lantern while she washed her hands at the basin. He watched the way she moved, quiet, sure, unhurried in a way she hadn't been when she first came. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter, watching him right back. You ever think about building more? She asked. He looked up. You mean the cabin? I mean a life, something that stretches out, a garden, maybe a smokehouse, chickens that don't roost in your wheelbarrow. He leaned against the table. I never had a reason. You do now, she asked. He didn't speak, just stepped forward and took her hand. That night they sat outside long after the fire had gone to coals. The moon was high and the stars pulled close. Hattie leaned against his shoulder, her braid brushing his arm. I thought I'd feel different, she said. Now that he's gone. You don't. I feel like I can breathe deeper, she said. But there's still something under my ribs, not fear, just wait. It'll lift. She didn't answer right away. Then, there's a part of me that's still waiting for him to ride up. Even though I know he won't. Cullen wrapped his arm around her. Memory doesn't vanish just because the man does. I want to plant something, she said. Something that takes time. Lettuce, maybe, or beans, something that needs tending. He looked down at her. Then we'll plant come thaw. In the following weeks, the rhythm between them settled into something neither had expected but both understood. Hattie took to the land as if it had been waiting for her. She lined the edge of the cabin with flat stones, swept the porch before the sun rose, and kept a list in her head of what seeds they'd need when spring came proper. Cullen found himself watching her more than he worked, not out of worry but wonder. She moved with purpose now, not just survival. One afternoon, she stood at the far edge of the pasture, her back to him, holding a strip of canvas she'd cut for a scarecrow. He came up behind her and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. You thinking birds'll be that bold? They're always bold when something's new, she said. I'd rather not have them think they're welcome, he smiled. You've got a sharp mind for this. She looked up at him, eyes steady. I've got plans, Cullen, not just for beans and chickens. He didn't ask what they were, he just nodded once. Then we'll see them through. That night, after supper, she rolled out a piece of rough paper and started drawing lines garden rows, a coop, a rain barrel near the eaves. Cullen watched from across the table, his hands folded. You're not just staying, he said. You're shaping it. She reached across and placed her hand over his. It's ours now, she said, and he knew, without needing to ask, that she meant more than land. Spring came late that year, clinging to frost and slow-thawing earth, but it came all the same. The day the peach tree behind the barn showed its first pale blossoms, Cullen found Hattie kneeling near the creek, her palms sunk deep into the soil, sleeves pushed past her elbows. He stood a moment on the rise, watching her press seeds into the furrows she had carved with a stick and steady hands. She didn't notice him at first, and he didn't call out. Some part of him still marveled that she stayed. When she finally looked up, she brushed her hair from her brow with the back of her wrist. You ever think about building a cellar? He stepped down toward her. For storing or hiding, she tipped her head. Mostly storing, but I wouldn't mind knowing it's there if one day we need to vanish. I know where we could dig. There's a slope near the back fence that drains clean. Wouldn't flood come rain. She nodded once. Then let's build it. They worked slow and steady. Cullen laid the stone, and Hattie packed the earth tight between them. She'd grown leaner, muscle in her arms and sun darkening her skin, and there was a quiet confidence in the way she moved beside him. She never hesitated to take the heavier end of a beam or climb down into the pit when the ladder wobbled. She didn't ask for praise, and he didn't offer it. But he watched her more than the work. One morning, as they ate on the porch, she turned to him with a distant gaze. You think we'll ever see much of town again? She asked. He chewed slowly. If we need supplies, or if you want to. I don't miss the noise, she said, but I might like to walk through a mercantile again, touch fabric that hasn't been handled by 10 hands before. We can ride down next week. Early before it crowds. She tapped her finger on the edge of her cup. Would folks stare? Some might. She turned to him. Would you mind? He met her eyes. Not if you're beside me. That night, she brought out a bundle wrapped in muslin. I've been saving this, she said, unfolding a length of blue calico. Found it tucked behind a drawer in your chest. Still good, he smiled. That belonged to my mother. She used it to wrap apples in the winter. I was thinking I'd make a dress. He reached out and touched the edge of the fabric. You'd look good in it. She didn't answer, but her gaze held his a little longer than it needed to. The trip to town came 2 days later, under a sky so wide and bright, it made the mountains look distant and small. Hattie wore the new dress, the color soft as faded forget-me-not, and she held the reins with a sure grip. Cullen rode close, one hand resting on the saddle horn, rifle strapped to the bedroll behind him out of habit, not fear. At the general store, The shopkeeper, a woman older than both of them, with a keen eye and no time for gossip, nodded at Hattie and handed her a bolt of undyed muslin without being asked. "Word is," she said, "you've tamed the old Tate place." Hattie didn't flinch. It wasn't wild. Just waiting. Cullen paid without a word. On the way out, an older man on the boardwalk tipped his hat. "Fine day for planting," he said, eyeing the seed sacks. "Hope it takes." "It will," Cullen replied. They didn't linger. By dusk, they were home again, the quiet of the cabin wrapping around them like a familiar coat. As the weeks passed, the garden pushed through first the beans, then the squash, then the climbing peas curling up the twine she'd tied from fence post to branch. The cellar stayed dry through the first storm, and Cullen added a small shelf for pickling jars. By midsummer, they had enough to eat without rationing. One evening, after supper, Hattie brought out a tin box he hadn't seen before. Inside were scraps of paper, some lined, some torn from old pamphlets. She spread them on the table. "I've been writing things down," she said. "Recipes, what blooms when, which chickens lay better after rain." Cullen looked down at the neat rows of script. "You're keeping a record. I want to leave something behind that says we were here, that we made something from what was broken." She looked up. "I want to add your hand to it." He took the pencil and wrote beneath her line about the beans. "Best yield when planted after the second thaw." Grown stronger in her hands than in mine. She reached across and covered his hand with hers. The first frost came early that fall, dusting the porch railings and leaving curls of ice in the water pail. Hattie brought the last of the herbs indoors, hanging them from the rafters. Cullen sealed the windows and filled the gaps in the south wall with fresh clay and straw. They worked side by side, wordless, moving through the rhythm they'd built. One night, as the fire crackled low, she stood from her chair and crossed to where he sat by the hearth. "I didn't think I'd be this happy," she said. He looked up, his hand settling at her waist. "I didn't think I'd be anything at all, not really." She lowered herself into his lap, arms around his neck, her cheek resting against his. "You were always more than you thought." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "So were you." They didn't speak again that night, not with words. The fire burned low, and the wind outside shifted from west to north, but inside the cabin, the warmth held. By the time the snow came, they had everything they needed: canned pears, dried beans, firewood stacked high. The chickens wintered well, and the mare grew heavy with foal. Hattie stitched a quilt from old shirts, and Cullen built a cradle from pine boards he'd saved since the first year. The child came in late March, strong, lunged, and red-faced, with Hattie's eyes and Cullen's quiet temper. They named him Jonah, after no one in particular, just a name that felt like weathered wood and clean sky. In the years that followed, the garden doubled in size. Cullen built a loft above the barn, and Hattie taught Jonah his letters with a slate and chalk she kept in a wooden box. They didn't speak of the past anymore, not because it hurt, but because it had been laid to rest. The only mark that mattered now was the warmth in her hand when she reached for his, or the way he watched her laugh with their son beneath the cottonwoods. At night, when the boy slept and the fire burned low, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket, watching the stars blink through the branches. "We built this," Hattie would say sometimes, and Cullen always would answer, "Together." And they had, and they would. For all the seasons to come.